So there's no doubt now it is summer and it is hot out there. I know, like in the wintertime, some of us get SAD, seasonal affective disorder. I did that when we lived in Louisville. Oh, that was too much winter. But even when it's just rainy, we tend to get kind of grumpy and grouchy. Restaurant staff have noticed that people actually tip better on sunny days. They've done studies. They get more tips when it's nice weather. They get worse tips when the weather is bad and overcast. And when it's really hot outside, we can lose our cool, both figuratively and literally. Was that the New York Yankees coach that lost his cool this week? They blamed it on the excessive heat. Weather is one factor that is in play in how we react to events of our lives. Another important factor is our expectations, what we expect of ourselves and others, what we hope for, what we think we're allowed to hope for, what we have given up hoping for. One of the reasons that we read these stories from the scriptures is to examine our expectations. What do we expect from life, from other people? The things that we expect from ourselves and from others, well, they're established early on, what we were taught in our families, in our schools, in our early relationships with our friends, through the stories that our culture tells in TV and movies and the news cycle, and our religious traditions. Now, part of being Baptist in the original congregational sense is the belief that we can come back to Scripture together and reconsider what we've been taught. We can listen to these stories anew. We can allow them to speak to us again and to teach us something new and maybe help us reset some of our expectations. So today we're listening to two stories about three women who changed their expectations in the presence of God. Now, in that first story that we read, Abraham is startled by three visitors who seem to have slipped up on him on a hot day while he's cooling off in the shade. He's not really the star of the story. But he seems to know that these visitors are special. There's something different and important about them, and he jumps up and he bows to them and offers them hospitality. And as these visitors begin to talk, we realize that God's presence is with them. And they bring a message that God is not finished with Sarah and Abraham yet. The promised child is still in their future. And they say the next time that they come visit, Sarah will have a son. And Sarah's listening in the doorway and she laughs. In this encounter with the presence and message of God, Sarah responds with laughter, and not that's a funny joke laughter, but skeptical, disbelieving laughter. And who could fault her for being skeptical? She and Abraham are old. She laughed because at the age of 90, she had long since finished crying about being childless. Probably not long after they were married, she began to worry that something was wrong, and then she would continue to hope perhaps this time will be the time, and it never was the time. So by midlife, Sarah had stopped wondering anymore. She knew that that hope and that expectation would not be fulfilled. And these were just facts, and she was a skeptic. And skepticism can lead to cynicism, but skepticism and cynicism, they're both based on expectations unfulfilled, hopes deferred. Experience has shown that there is something to be skeptical about. And I really appreciate skeptics. I think skepticism brings us to a more authentic faith. A faith that refuses to look at the facts and face reality can be shallow and artificial and often leads to depression when things don't ever turn out as expected. But a skeptic like Sarah can avoid becoming cynical if she is open to being surprised by grace when the Spirit of God comes through in unexpected ways and places, when the twists and turns of life maybe present a completely new set of joys and opportunities to grow and change. So Sarah's skeptical laughter turns into hopeful anticipation as she allows herself to revise her expectations and maybe dream new dreams, create a sense of hope again. Now, in our next story, we come across Martha, who is hosting an impromptu party and class on spirituality in her home as Jesus drops by with that crowd that seems to gather wherever he goes. And you can imagine she's counting heads as they come in the doors, and she's scouring the pantry to come up with something that can feed this whole group and hopefully impress the special guest of honor. And we get the impression that Martha must be the older child in this family. She's the one with that hyper responsibility syndrome, as her sister just joins the group and listens to the teacher. And we are told that Martha is distracted by her many tasks. I like the fact that the word here for distracted comes from the same word as spasm. We might say Martha was totally spazzed out by the work that she felt she had to do. But it wasn't the work itself that was the problem. It was how worked up she was getting about the work. And she gets a bit overwhelmed. And she bursts in and she confronts the guest that she so wanted to impress and says, "Don't you even care that my sister has left me to do all this work? Tell her to come in here and help me." I mean, she's aggressively confronting Jesus. And she's a wreck because she's trying to respond to the enormity of this situation. She has lost her sense of perspective. And I think we can all relate to that scene somewhere, sometime in our lives, when sometimes there's just too many details and too many expectations to fulfill. And the days get packed with so many things to remember, and our minds just become overwhelmed and worried and distracted. And like Martha, we just want to explode at somebody, whoever put us in this untenable situation, even if that somebody is God. So Martha, in her out of touch with herself condition, thinks that Jesus is going to see the situation the way that she does, and he's going to fix it for her. And she corners him, and she assumes he's going to agree that Mary is just shirking her duties. "Don't you care that my sister has left all the work for me to do by myself?" Surely he should feel a little guilty of not having sensed her trauma, her need, and sent Mary on into the kitchen sooner. Mary, on the other hand, seems to fit the negative description that's given to her of being irresponsible. She just sat down with the visitors and listened to the special guest speaker. She sensed the presence of God, and she forgot her manners, and she forgot her proper place in the house and the family, and she sat at the Lord's feet, which is significant because this phrase was saved for disciples, for students that have been accepted into this rabbi's spiritual training program. This was a radical countercultural message that a woman could sit at the feet of the master and learn from him just like any male disciple. I believe this is one of the reasons that this story is in our scriptures, preserved for all time. Because I'm sure there are a lot of stories, that didn't quite make it into the Bible, things that Jesus said, encounters with people that we will never know about. So the stories that were held on to and were repeated over and over until they made it in that final cut of the canon, they were important for a reason. And most of them showed that Jesus was a cultural change agent. And we might notice that this story comes right after the story of the Good Samaritan, as we read last week. The story of the Good Samaritan makes the enemy the good guy. The foreigner is your neighbor. To follow Jesus, you have to change your cultural understanding of appropriate relationships. Your national and religious leaders may tell you that someone is your enemy, but Jesus tells you that they are your neighbor, and they are loved by God, and you are to love them as you love yourself. And today's story establishes that, in fact, women were disciples. And unfortunately and understandably, Martha is complicit in defending the cultural expectations that Mary, as a woman, should have been in the kitchen assisting in the preparation of the food for their guests. You notice Martha did not fuss at her brother Lazarus for sitting in the living room with Jesus. But Mary choosing to sit with the disciples and listen to the message was countercultural. It was breaking the tradition. And understandably, this always feels unfair to the person who is playing by the rules and doing what they are supposed to do. But Jesus approves of this seismic cultural shift, and he says, Mary has chosen the better part, and it will not be taken away from her. Now, I want to be clear that just because this story is about women changing cultural expectations for women, it doesn't mean that this isn't a story for everyone. Because think about it. For all the centuries of Christian history, women have heard the stories of men in the Bible with the assumption that we would translate them into our experience. So we know that everyone can do that. These stories featuring women also speak to our common human experience. And whatever your gender, you are allowed and encouraged to reconsider the cultural expectations that are placed on you. Jesus was affirming the decision to stop worrying about what is proper and what other people think long enough to be in the presence of God and just take in that experience. He's not saying that working in the kitchen is bad and sitting and meditating on God is good, but he is recognizing that all of our good, important work needs to be balanced and nourished by times doing nothing but being with God. And Jesus isn't really criticizing Martha or making her the bad guy or trying to shame her. He shows compassion for her, repeating her name twice, Martha, Martha, speaking slowly and calmly. Thomas Truby points out that distracted people often find it hard to listen. He explains, when I am distracted and I am in some sort of trance, and there is this transparent world that somewhat seems to be soundproof, and I get detached from what is around me. And it takes someone speaking my name the first time just to break into my inner barriers, and the second time to convey that gentle intention of wanting to help me. And then Jesus shows love for Martha by giving her some accurate feedback. Martha, you're worried and distracted by many things. Our worries cause us to live in a world of our own fears, often unfounded. Distractions take us away from what is important and get us fixed on things that don't really matter. And Martha has found herself scattered and out of control. She needs what Mary has chosen and assumes that that is not where she is expected to be. But the truth is that our active lives of doing the important things are strengthened by the time spent in being with God, meditating on God, listening for that quiet voice of God speaking to us in our hearts, calming our fears and giving us a sense of direction. Martha is that person who knows how to get things done efficiently and on time, but she tries so hard to make a good impression and get it right that she misses out on the moment. And Mary sits at the feet of Jesus and listens to his words, listening for that vision of what is life meant to be. How do I fit in? What can I expect, and what is expected of me? And this truth is here for all of us, that without taking that time out, we can't go on preparing hospitality for the world. For the world will eventually distract us and anger us and exhaust us. But with the time given to renewing our sense of purpose, of reconsidering our expectations and our meaning of life and our vision, then we can prepare meals for the hungry and care for the sick and show hospitality to the stranger and keep on loving as Christ has loved us. What we learn from paying attention to Jesus is that our lives are guided and energized by God's Spirit. And God is in the world healing and feeding and restoring. And what we do for others matters. And we can rest in the presence of God. And we can change our expectations and hope for God's new creation on earth as it is in heaven. And maybe we feel like all of these people today at some time in our lives. At this place, at this moment in your life, you may feel like Sarah and you may be a bit skeptical, not wanting to open yourself up to new hopes or dreams. You may feel like Martha, trying so hard to do everything right that you miss the magic of this moment with God. But you could be Mary, forgetting your manners, not even caring what anyone thinks, listening to Jesus' countercultural message. For God is here in this moment, and you don't want to miss it.